Good afternoon and welcome to Go Beyond. My name is Alyssa Robinson. I am here with our senior pastor, Reverend Daniel Humbert. And Go Beyond is a time that we have a deeper conversation around the message from Sunday. And this Sunday was all about going out and spreading the news of Jesus. Jesus is risen. Jesus is still risen. So we should probably talk about it.
Every day,
right?
every day.
And so my very first question today, you might not have an answer to, but I want to know.
Of course you do.
What's the rest of the story for Mary Magdalene? Because she is the first evangelist of the church, but we don't really get to follow her like we do for Paul and Peter and the other, founders of the church, but she's so integral.
She is. And I think for me, the rest of the story is not so much what you might have intended in your question, because as you sort of actually point out, there's not a lot post the resurrection. But here's
I didn't know if there was some secret text that only pastors know about from
seminary.
There is
actually. It is. It's what's known. I'm going to use a word that you probably have never heard or might not ever use again, but an apocryphal gospel called the Gospel of Philip. It's not in our Gospels, right? So the Gospel of Philip has some of this information, but it didn't make the canon, so we don't use it as authoritative. But here's what I want to share, because I think so many people don't really know about Mary herself. A couple of things that we ought to know. One is all four of the Gospels place her at both the crucifixion and as somebody who cites Jesus afterwards, right? So she's the first person that's identified. She's the first person who's identified, and we saw this on Sunday, as the first evangelist, right? But here's something most of us don't know. She is listed in Luke's Gospel in the 8th chapter as among a couple of women who are financial supporters of Jesus. So she's she's helping to foot the bill for some of his ministry. That's big news in biblical day, right? I mean, so she's listed there in Luke chapter 8 as somebody alongside of some other women who are helping to support his ministry. That means it's at least two things. One is she's a woman of means, because that would not be common at all in that day. And number two, it means she's actually a disciple, not named as one of the 12, but she's one of these folks who's literally sort of following Jesus and supporting his ministry. And again, in Jesus's day, man, that's like gold for a woman to be identified as a disciple, as a financial supporter. And so here she is, listed at the crucifixion, listed at the tomb in the Gospels, and listed as a first evangelist along with a financial supporter. That's kind of the rest of the story, but it's not after the resurrection. This is all during Jesus' lifetime.
Do you think that as the Gospels were being passed down, because we know they weren't written right away,
right.
It was passed down orally from generation to generation. Do you think that it was shocking for them to hear that the first person to experience the resurrection of Jesus was a woman?
Yes. Yeah, I do. And I think that's a part of the powerful good news of Jesus, is that he's here for everybody. Because again, I hate to belabor a point, but I think it's important we acknowledge it, is if indeed women are considered second-class citizens, as unfortunately they were in Jesus' day, here's a guy lifting them up as the first evangelist, as a financial supporter, as an equal among men, as his followers. That's big news. And we ought to sort of take note of that. Paul would perpetuate that in his letters, that women are leaders in the church, that women are teachers in the church, and that women are financial supporters of the ministry of the church. That's big news. Yeah.
So kind of shifting gears a little bit here, it was all about sharing an invitation. When was the last time you invited someone to church, and how did you do it?
Yeah, so if you're asking me when was literally the last time, it was for Easter and a few weeks ago. And for me, it was more about social promotion in terms of a personal physical ask, face-to-face or whatever. So that's the most recent. And that was simply sharing stuff that somebody I know here, put together and produced and all that kind of good stuff. And we're grateful for that. That's easy, I think. But it's also a way to do it. And we should never forget that, right? That's a way to do it. But in terms of a physical face-to-face or whatever, it's with some of my neighbors, some of the folks on my street. So people I already know, have some kind of a relationship with. And it's just simple. Hey, gosh, I don't know if you know, Easter's coming up and we're having a service and we'd love to have you. I mean, it's that simple, really.
How does it come up in conversation, though? Because I think that we all feel awkward. Well, I can't speak for everybody. I feel awkward talking about, like, bringing up, inviting someone to church. And I don't know why. I'm sure it has a lot to do with, I know a lot of people have been hurt by the church, and I don't know the burdens that they're carrying from their relationship with the church. But it just, how does it even come up in conversation? Maybe easier for you because you're a pastor and people know that you do that for a living.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that could be true. I don't know. And it doesn't come up like all the time. I don't do it like every week. I don't do it every time I see them. But for special occasions like Christmas and Easter, I'll invite folks like that in a conversation. For me, it's in my head, right? Because I'm thinking about it, concerned about it. And so, I don't know. It just, if it's weeks out, 1 or 2 or 3 weeks out, I'm talking to my neighbor outside, right? And I go, golly. So I just invite him. So I think what I've come to recognize is my role in something like this is just to issue the invitation. I'm not responsible for how they receive it. I'm not responsible for what they do with it. I'm not responsible for what they think about it. My obligation, if you will, or my invitation is literally just to issue it. I, with one of our church members, just had a conversation about this, and it was around Easter as well. And so he and I were talking, and somehow it came up. I don't remember how, but somehow it came up that he has invited somebody to church before. And he said, you know, I have invited them, and he gave a number. I don't remember the number, but he said something like, I've invited them 8 or 9 times. And, you know, when you hear that, you're like, oh, my gosh, I don't know that I'd invite anybody 8 or 9 times. And so I affirmed him, number one. But number two, I'm like, here's a guy who's realized his obligation is nothing more than laying that invitation out there. And he is unconcerned, clearly, and positively so, whether the person comes or not. Because he followed that up with, they've never been. He's done it 8 or 9 times. And they've never been.
Are they annoyed with him at this point? Or are they like, just stop bringing it up?
Well, what I don't remember as well is what is the time context, right? I mean, is that over the last year or is that over 8 or 9 years, right? I don't know. But I just affirmed him because I said, man, thank you so much for issuing the invitation and knowing that that's all we're called to do is just do it. And I'm sure at some point, and maybe it's already happened, I don't know, he realizes, golly, 8 or 9 times, maybe that's enough for that person. You know, who knows? I don't know. I'm just glad he does it, right? Because I think that's the deal, is trying to figure out, can I do it? Will I do it? And then hopefully eventually just doing it and knowing that, do I hope they come? Obviously. Do I hope that they think I'm not an idiot? Sure. But the point is really just to issue the invitation.
So, and this is kind of leading us into the next couple of weeks. So the last 2 weeks of April, we're doing a series called Go Natural, where we're talking about how we can share the good news of Jesus with other people, but in a way that fits my personality and the way that I interact in the world, because I'm not going to be a person standing on a street corner waving the Bible in the air talking about the Gospels. And I'm not going to be a person who every single person I meet, I say, have you heard of Jesus? You know, that's just not me. So how can I tell people about Jesus in a way that's right for me? Someone like me who, I have said to you before, I function in gray areas when it comes to spirituality, and I'm not sure of anything. And if someone challenges my faith, I don't have an answer all the time. I'm like, ooh, that's a good point. Let's think about that one, you know? And so how can because I think that what a lot of people want from someone who's talking about faith and talking about Jesus is someone who is emphatic in that. And I'm not always that way.
Really?
I'm a very passionate person in general.
There you go.
I can fire you up about anything.
There you go. Yeah. Well, so I'm going to give a cheap, shameless plug. A more full response to this question is my sermon this Sunday. I'm going to give some examples, if you will, and share some thoughts about how I hope we can do this naturally. So, watch or, show up or invite somebody to do the same, right? So, but a short answer is this. I think the only good and appropriate way to tell people about Jesus, invite them to church, however you want to lay that out there, is number one, conversationally. Man, just a part of your conversation. And I remember you've shared a number of times now, and I think it's great that when you go to bars, one of your favorite things to do is just ask an open-ended question about what do you think of God or about just a very open-ended question about theology, right? Man, that's a starting point. And then what you do, I believe, is you listen to their answer, right? And what a great thing to do, right? Ask a question, then actually listen, right? And so I think that's the best form of making the ask or sharing the story is first listen. Because I think it's important that when we get to the point of sharing, if it actually even comes up, is that we share in the context of that person's existence, right? If you have heard, for instance, in somebody's response to what do you think about God or whatever, is, by golly, I think that's a bunch of hooey, or golly, I kind of think about it, but I'm wondering why there's suffering in the world, or whatever the response is. Man, having listened, you know the person better and you know what they might be receptive to, right? I think Jesus did a lot of that. I think he listened first. Golly, in several instances when he heals people or has impact on people or teaches people, he has first listened to what their circumstances were. And then on a number of occasions when he heals somebody, he knows they needed healing because they shared it or another family member shared it. And when he taught in response to what he'd heard from the people. And so a part of it's just listening, and a part of that's conversation, right? And then secondly, being bold enough, having listened, having known the person to a certain degree, is to be bold enough to then go, golly, I wonder if they might be willing to hear whatever it is I'm able to share. And then finally, it's share your story, whatever that is. And a part of your story is, man, I live in gray areas, and I'm not real certain about X or Y or Z. I think it's important to share that, because I think people are very willing, and I think you've attested to this in your bar conversations. Isn't it true that people are willing to have a conversation about God when it's very non-judgmental, non-condemning, very open-ended? They know that it's safe to share. I think it's safe to share your story after you've already listened to them, affirmed who they are, wherever they are, and then to share something of your story, because your story is yours. Nobody can say that's not true, that's not real. Nobody can say that's a bunch of bunk. I mean, they could, but with no validity, right? Because it's your story.
And I will say, you don't hear the phrases "a bunch of hooey" and "a bunch of bunk" often in the bar scene. They phrase things a little differently.
Yeah, they do. I get it.
But
I phrase things differently too, but we're on a church-related show.
So I think that one of the things that is striking to me is that, first of all, those bar conversations that I have, and of course they're not exclusively at bars, but it's kind of fun, like sitting up at a bar with a drink in your hand and just like saying, hey, what do you think about God?
Right.
Everybody has an answer in some way or another. But it never ends with an invitation to church. And it never, well, not never, but doesn't always end with me sharing my faith or my story.
Nor should it, I must add.
And I think that part of that is people are more receptive when you're coming to the table with actual genuine curiosity.
Right.
And not, I never go into those conversations with the expectation of like, okay, at the end of this, I'm going to find a way to invite them to church, or I'm going to find a way to tell them about my faith. Like, it's never going down that path. And if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And that's okay.
That's correct. Yeah, I think that's a part of the answer to your question. Because I think, number one, it's not always about church, and I think we get hung up on that as well. Obviously, at Easter or Christmas, it probably is about inviting somebody to church, to that worship experience. But the ultimate goal is not about church. The ultimate goal is helping somebody to see or know this guy named Jesus and what he teaches. And I believe he's got something to offer the world, right? And I believe he's had impact on my life. And so the point really is just to share faith, not to get somebody in the doors of the church. And I think that becomes really important as well. And to share about Jesus is really only best done, in my opinion, in the context of relationship. And therefore, standing on the street corner, waving a sign or a Bible or whatever, or browbeating, that's not helpful. And I don't think it has a positive impact on the kingdom at all. So that's just me.
All right. Well, that is all the time that we have today. But thank you for joining us for another episode of Go Beyond. As always, you can catch all previous episodes at tmumc.org/go beyond. And come see what this is all about this Sunday for our first week of Go Natural. You can check it out online at tmumc.org/watch or in person online. We live stream at 9 and 11 a.m. In person, we will be in the sanctuary at 10 a.m. So come join us and learn how to share your faith just as you are.
Go natural. See y'all.